Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Thief of Magic, Shadow Minds, Book 1 by Bree Moore, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. No one would notice when Lee slipped out of this world. She curled her fingers and took a breath of cool night air, the smell of rain on asphalt filling her senses. Pedestrians dodged around the edges of the bus stop shelter she stood beneath, walking with umbrellas held upright and hunched shoulders to guard against the drizzle. 10:46 p.m. Lee tucked the phone into her pocket and hummed softly to calm herself. Tonight had to go off without a hitch. She didn't have any reason to believe it would go wrong except for the anxiety building in her chest. A bus hissed to a stop on the glistening street, and the people who had been waiting under the bus shelter filed up the steps. Lee stayed behind, and the driver stared at her. She waved him on. As the bus pulled away, tingling started in Lee's fingers and toes. The liminal realm had closed in on the now quiet bus stop, calling her to step through the curtain of space and time and transport herself somewhere else. Anywhere else. Lee eased into it. Her skin itched, turning ashen, and changed to an intangible shadow. A red aura glowed around her hands. The traffic light reflections on the road blurred. She took a single step forward. Earth's fabric of time and space tugged at her skin, sending pins and needles across it, but she took another step and the sensation lessened. Speed was of the essence tonight. Fortunately, there were no crowds or glaring daylight to thicken the air and make liminal travel more difficult, and she only needed to travel a couple of blocks. Lee stepped between the cars that crawled down the road at a sluggish pace. She surpassed the speed of traffic in the other realm as she jogged down the wet sidewalk. Nothing else moved around her, and the sounds like muffled static. She rounded the block and headed north until she stepped onto the graveyard-like campus for St. Louis University. In an alternative reality, one where she wasn't liminal, but a normal young woman with normal aspirations and interests, she'd be studying art there right now. Studying, maybe even partying a little bit, finding a guy to settle down with, selling her art. But that reality didn't exist. It never would. Lee shoved the sadness down and let the beautiful thoughts exit her mind the way they had come. She had already mourned that life. Now she would settle for a chance to have a future at all. Any future. In the liminal realm, she walked past a campus security guard without pause. The man might have felt a breeze or heard a single footstep, but by the time he turned around, Lee would be long gone. Being essentially invisible came in handy as a thief. She walked the paths between the tall brick buildings with confidence and came to a stop in front of her destination. The Samuel couple's mansion. A brick monstrosity with Romanesque architecture dating back over 100 years. To anyone else, it would look like a museum, dark after hours, nothing remarkable about the exterior. But to Lee, a dozen pinpoints of silver light shone out from the inner walls. One of them was her mark, the brightest, shining from beneath the window on the second floor. Lee walked up to the ornate wooden door on the front porch. Safe in the dark alcove, she shook her hands and felt intuitively for the access point back to Earth's realm. For this next part, she had to be physical. She wasn't a ghost that could go through doors and walls, and there weren't any lay points inside the house. Stepping out of the liminal realm made her break out in a light sweat, and her hands trembled. Lee adjusted the slouchy beanie on her head, tugged on her jacket, and pulled a worn black leather case from her pocket. She traced the S scratched sloppily into the leather surface, then flipped the case open. The metal lockpicks gleamed back at her. "You should wear a less recognizable hat. What if someone noticed you loitering around here? It's the first thing they'd see." Lee jumped. Rissa walked up the steps behind her, dressed like she was ready for a steampunk convention, down to the goggles on her head. Lee snorted, trying to cover up how startled she'd been. "You're one to talk." "Hey, eccentric is my brand. People don't remember what I'm doing when they see me. There's a fine line between invisible style like mine and a blaring alarm like that hat." Lee fingered the pick in her hand, the anxiety she felt earlier creeping back. "You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you. Look, I'll cut straight to it. Sam said you were doing something tonight and you might need help." "Of course he did." Lee rubbed a hand on her cargo pants. Sam, the crew's tech guy, had tracked her movements to an almost obsessive point lately. Had Silas put him up to it? Or did he have his own reasons for tracking her? Rissa ignored Lee and kept talking. He didn't have many details, but he found your searches for this place on the computer and guessed this was where you were headed when you snuck out after dinner. What kind of trouble are you getting yourself into, kid? Lee's eyes narrowed. She hadn't been a kid for quite a few years now, but the nickname stuck. I don't need help. Well, I'm here, and judging by the aura of this house, you're going to need me. Just because you're a traveler doesn't mean you can deal with ghosts. Rissa crossed her arms and adopted a stubborn expression that Lee knew meant she wasn't budging. Rissa raised her eyebrows. You going to pick that lock or not? Lee turned to the lock and inserted the first pick. She was stuck with the tag-along, it seemed. With some maneuvering, the lock clicked open. The museum had modernized the locks. What they hadn't done was maintain a reliable security system. Something about paranormal activity setting it off and causing too many false alarms. So they had the regular bolts and locks in place, and some of the valuable items were in special alarmed cases, but otherwise it was a laughably easy target. And Lee knew for a fact that the item she sought wasn't in any safe. She would stroll in and carry it out without anyone raising a fuss. Lee slipped through the door, and Rissa followed. The door clicked shut, and Lee pocketed the leather pick case. Dim light from outside illuminated a large painting in a frame. The subject was a woman with pale clothes and a pale face, dark hair barely visible above her head. Her beakish, disapproving look seemed to be aimed specifically at the two thieves standing in her hallway. The nape of Lee's neck prickled. She wasn't here to steal a painting. She pivoted away from the painting and speed-walked down the hall. More than ever, she wanted to get the item and get out of that creepy place. Not so fast. We don't want to disturb the spirits of the house. Rissa stage whispered from behind, just like a speaker to be worried about disturbing the dead with too much noise. The spirits don't have to worry about getting caught, Lee shot back. We don't have a screener to cover our signature. And there aren't any ley lines here, so if someone catches us, we'll have to make it out on foot or risk getting trapped. Lee's spine crawled with a bug-like sensation. Lee wasn't supposed to be in on this job, and the longer they were gone, the more suspicious their crew leader would get. Silas didn't like it when anybody did their own jobs. According to him, it took money from the crew and risked valuable resources. But this job was worth every risk. After this, she wouldn't need the crew anymore. You can't go liminal here? Rissa's voice wobbled. I can enter the liminal realm. That doesn't have much to do with ley lines, but if a ley line doesn't exist, I can't travel on it. Makes sense, Rissa said. Lee passed the first set of rooms, headed for the stairs at the center of the house. Going liminal would be harder if any security showed up. Having other people around made the liminal realm more distant and difficult to reach. If only she had a lay point she could use to jump to safety. Walking the liminal realm was like having a secret passage to follow. Jumping ley lines was like having a magical elevator that could get her almost anywhere. But this house had no ley line. She'd just have to not stick around long enough to get caught like any normal burglar. Lee glanced over her shoulder. Rissa had halted at a room that might have been a kitchen once. Now it was lined with locked glass cases filled with blueprint ceramics and other assorted dishes and cutlery. What about these items? I can't believe there's nothing in here, Rissa said. Nothing we want. Come on. Lee put her hands in her pockets. The ornate rugs patted their steps as the room opened up. A banister arched grandly above them. Lee took the stairs two at a time. No time to stop and admire the architecture. Lee! She ignored Rissa's hissed whisper, passing another painting of an austere woman with pale curled hair. What was with all the cranky women? Why not draw someone with a smile for once? Lee paused, staring down into the dark first floor. The silence had closed in, and she felt watched like she did in every church she ever entered. Rissa caught up to her contraptions on her waist clinking. She held one in her hand, a brass and glass compass-like instrument that whirred when she held it up. Lee, what do you know about this house? Lee shrugged. The tour guide said the owner had a couple of wives. One died young and their child. He had another wife and kids that all lived. He hated dancing, apparently. But none of that was relevant to their job. Rissa turned, brow creasing as she stared at the arms of her instrument. I'm picking up a very strong spirit presence, she muttered. Aren't you supposed to talk to them? calm them down and such. Lee turned a corner and glanced into the room. A sitting room. The room she wanted was a bedroom. Rissa hurried to catch up with Lee. "Did you bring an offering?" she hissed. "Why would I do that?" Lee asked, walking further down the hall. She poked her head into the next room. A four-poster bed stood sentinel against the left wall. "You knew the house was haunted and you didn't bring anything to appease the ghosts? Damn, kid, you're lucky I'm here." Rissa pulled a $100 shaped disc out of her pocket and set it on the floor outside. Lee glanced at it. "What's that?" "A bauble. Ghosts love them. Did you find it yet?" Rissa asked. Lee scanned the room, passing over a glass case holding an angelic sculpture and a broad wooden chest until she found the dresser. She stepped into the room. "This looks like the place," Lee said. "I do not have a good feeling about this," Rissa muttered, exchanging the first instrument for a second one with a handle and a protruding metal end. She waved it over her head, the metal arm making a low thrumming sound. Lee breathed deeply, putting her fingers against her temples. She felt for the tingling curtain of the liminal realm, leaving Rissa frozen in the earth realm. A silver light shot out from beneath the dresser, glowing through its wooden surface. Lee looked at Rissa and saw her mouth open mid-word, still holding the instrument. Her hand reached slowly toward Lee as if to stop her. Lee pulled herself back to earth and fell to her knees, groping beneath the dresser. "Of here!" Rissa hissed. Lee cursed. She scrambled against the wooden surface, searching for a panel, a false bottom. "Just a moment!" She gripped the lip that caught her fingers and shoved in two directions. It moved on the second, thrusting to the right. An item clunked to the floor, and Lee snatched it up. Now that she had the bracelet, she had all the luck she could need. The bracelet was a Waymary, and it literally drew luck from the wearer's surroundings, storing it to be used later. According to Lee's intel, each bead could be filled and used one time. An item like that was rare and valuable. Valuable enough to be sold in exchange for information that would lead Lee to the cure of the magic that ate at her like cancer. Rissa tapped her shoulder, startling her. "What?" Lee snapped, jamming the Waymary into the front pocket of her jacket. Her fingers brushed a second bracelet that waited inside, a fake that would fool just about anyone at a glance. It would come in handy if Silas figured out what she'd been doing tonight. The lights flickered on. She glanced back at Rissa, whose eyes widened in fear. The woman wasn't standing anywhere near the light switch. Lee stood, glancing around the room. The lights flickered again, turning off, then on, then off. Lee didn't see anything, but the hair on her arms rose and a screech sounded from a radiator in the corner, long and low. It shouldn't have been running, but it hissed and rattled like it was possessed. "I don't think it likes your offering," Lee said. She grabbed Rissa's arm, shoving the item in her pocket with her other hand. "That light will draw attention. Let's go." Rissa stumbled after her, grabbing some Latin words. The room went dark as they left, and ahead of them another set of lamps started to strobe. "Banish it or whatever you do," Lee shouted, ducking as several books flew up from a shelf on the first floor. A hailstorm of literature. "Spirit, hear me!" Rissa called, skidding to a halt. Lee stood with her, panting. Rissa raised her arms and her hair rose as it filled with static. The books fell to the floor. "Do you object to our presence or to our theft?" Rissa swayed in place, eyes shut tight. Nothing moved, but the lights stopped flickering. "What is it saying?" Lee asked, speaking from the corner of her mouth. Something was out there, whatever she believed. "Do you mean us harm?" Rissa asked. The lights flipped off, plunging them into darkness again. "Was that a yes or a no?" Lee asked. "The spirit is giving us obscured passage from the house. It means us well," Rissa replied. "Then why all the—" Lee was cut off by a thudding sound downstairs, and then the front door of the mansion slammed open. Flashlights sliced through the darkness of the front hall. A bold female voice cracked like a whip through the room. "Stop right there!" Shit.